Hey all, so for part 2 of the Buzzbee Cyclonic mod, I have done some attempt to work ahead a little bit. Let me get this out of here for a second. I have here an open flywheel project cage. This is for the Brute. As Homely asked in the other one, is there an open flywheel project cage that works? And yes, the Brute one will fit the Cyclonic. Unfortunately, the Brute has a little cutaway here to allow the magazine to be inserted because it's on the other side, but the Cyclonic, the magazine gets inserted on here. So one of the things we'll need to do is to cut part of the OFP cage off. In this case, I have elected to use Michel 2.0 motors because they're pretty decent, they're pretty cheap, and they work pretty well. So for the flywheels, I'm going to use one of these Omron, whatever, 15 or 21 clone switches, which is nice and clicky. I love these switches, they're very nice. And then for the pusher, I'm going to keep the stock motor in. I don't really like a high rate of fire, to be honest. This one gives you maybe 3 or 4 darts a second. Just use one of these little tiny switches for the pusher. And it still clicks. It's less of a click. You could wire it so that the second switch will only get power if the first switch is already revving. And that would allow it so that you couldn't activate the pusher without the flywheels being moving. However, in a 2-stage trigger setup, there's really no reason to do that because once everything is together, it will be physically impossible for that to actually happen. So you don't have to wire in tandem. This cage kind of pops on and off of the little posts here. So I'm going to push on here until each of the bottom feet kind of makes a pop. Like that. You will be able to get it so that the OFP cage sits with all 4 feet on the posts popped on. Alright, so now all 4 are on. As you might be able to see, this is where the magazine will hit the OFP cage. So I'm going to kind of eyeball this with a permanent marker. You're basically going to have to take off a straight line from the cage, like that, and then you will go up here, and you need to basically cut the groove of the magwell into the OFP cage. Usually I use a Dremel for this. So I just drew myself a guideline, and I'm going to pop this cage back off. I'm going to do my cutting of this OFP cage off camera because you don't really need to see that. It occurred to me that I forgot to talk about the Spinny Barrel on the front. This one has already been mostly destroyed. So what I tend to do is I pretty much remove all of the translucent plastic. I grab some angle pliers, I pinch here, and you twist, and you don't technically have to break the plastic itself, but if you twist enough, the glue where it was attached will come apart. If you do that on 6 of these 2 pieces will separate, and that part comes right off. I will usually discard that. This piece, interestingly, cannot still be removed because there's a lip at either side that prevents it. You know what? That's what it is. This thicker part here is glued onto the outside. This is actually technically a separate piece. Yeah, I can feel the inside of the lip there. That's what that is. So they slide this on and then they put that on, that's glued on. Typically I'm going to end up cutting the barrel some point anyway, so then this will just slide off, or I could destroy the rest of this translucent plastic to remove it. I've modified the OFP cage to fit the Cyclonic properly. What's weird about this is it was a lot more work than I remembered it being, even though I think I've modded 2 Cyclonics before with OFP cages. I knew that I would have to remove some of the material here because the magazine wants to hit up against the cage right here when you put it in. However, what I wasn't remembering, and what I definitely had to do, was I had to remove some material from the top 2 posts because the screws that come with it are not long enough to get into their posts unless I remove that material. So they weren't reaching the posts at all because this part is just too tall or too thick. So the next things I'm going to do are some teardown. Here's our original setup. Now, for this mod, I'm not going to be using the original flywheel cage or flywheels or any of that at all, so I'm just going to remove them for now to make this easier. Also, I'm rewiring, so none of this wiring really matters. And I just set this off to the side somewhere. Alright. This is what we'll mostly be using. This whole block has your pusher mechanism in it. And you'll be mounting your switches over here. There is another switch here that I will be removing. And the switch, I don't know if I guess you'd call it a lock. But basically what happens is this button right here, this switch, yeah, I think the switch activates the Spinny Barrel at the front, whether there's a mag in it or not. But only if there's a mag in it will it wrap the flywheels. I think that's it. But I don't care. I'm removing the barrel entirely, and those don't matter. So this switch will be removed as well. Alright, we'll be keeping this stock motor because I don't go too high in the voltage. Usually I use either a 6.6 volt life or 7.2 volt NIMH battery. Neither of those, so far at least, neither of those is enough to kill this stock motor, and I don't really need a high rate of fire anyway. Oh yeah, while I'm here, I won't be using the stock battery tray, so I can remove that entirely, but I'll be cutting off this little part here because that's where this battery door screws in. So I'll be keeping about this much of it. So I'm going to remove this. 3 screws here to remove. Okay. And this is entirely not used. This piece can now go back on because, as I said, we'll be screwing in our battery door there. Alright, so that's basically ready. Let's start getting some of this wiring on here. Now these contact switches will screw off. This is one of the few instances where some of the screws are a different size, but we won't be screwing back in anything else to that side. So now this surface here has some molding on it for where these contact switches were screwed in. I'll be gluing my replacement switches on, so I'm actually going to take this material off entirely. I could use a Dremel for that, or I'll probably just use a sharp knife. Alright. So what we're down to is our original motor, a pusher motor with just remnants of the stock wiring on it. I'll be desoldering those and resoldering replacement wiring on it. I normally use 18 gauge because I don't use motors that are super powerful. So to remove this piece, I think we need to take off 4 screws. Get that switch out of there. Realistically, this is optional because if you simply cut these wires off, this will still be here, but it won't interfere with anything. I like removing it entirely if I'm not going to use it. So it's just going to lift out, and there's another one of those small screws that holds the actual contact switching. I'm going to put back on those 4 screws. Alright, so this thing is ready, pretty much ready to go. This side of the blaster is going to house our battery, our replacement battery that is not AA's. And some of these posts become unnecessary when you have no battery tray. Get as low to the bottom of the plate as I can. So anyway, I clipped off both of these posts. These 2 posts because you don't really need the structural support if you don't have a battery tray here, and it gives you more room to put an actual battery pack. Alright, so I've decided to get started on some of the soldering, and for now I'm going to solder positive wire of the pusher motor, which I've decided to remove. There are 4 screws that you remove. This whole cap just kind of lifts off. And I'm going to solder the positive and negative of the flywheel motors. I have my soldering iron here, and it is heating up. While it's heating, I may as well apply some of my flux. This is a flux paste. I'm not really much of a soldering person in general. It seems to work fine, and let me tell you, doing solder without any of this worked very poorly when that's what I was doing. So I'm going to get the smallest dab possible on the tips of these motors. Okay, desoldered the tabs on the pusher motor. We're still recording. All right. Maybe I'll put the paste on the wire on this end instead of the tab. Just cut a relatively short segment of black that I'm going to use for the pusher motor. All that really matters is that it's long enough to be able to be spliced into the overall black wire at some point. Now, personally, when I just want to test that, my soldering works and the wires work and everything works, I pretty much just hook up a double A battery. I can see the motor spinning. Even for something like Michel motors, which draw more current, if all I'm trying to do is confirm that they spin, that should be good enough in my opinion. The real moment of truth for a soldering job like this is, do the flywheels spin, and do they spin in the correct direction? So I'm just putting on some Nerf stock flywheels here, temporarily, not tightly. You can see my wiring here. It's nothing fancy. I wouldn't say I'm a really good solderer or anything. And I'm just going to use the double A to test it because all I care is that they spin. Spinning, and they're spinning in the right direction, so that's all that matters right now. At the time of this video, I haven't actually decided what kind of flywheels I'm going to use in the final blaster. So I'm going to put this part back together, and when you remove that motor, you need to feed the wires that you added through this square, rectangular, whatever opening, like that. Set your motor in there the same as it was when you started. Fits pretty snugly in there, so I'm going to go with it. Screw these 4 screws. The red from the flywheels is going to go to this switch. We're going to go to normally open, and then I'll probably, let's see, the switch is going to set this kind of an orientation. So I'll probably make the battery plug or whatever is in that direction, up to the con. I don't normally use motor braking, although that's an option with any of these blasters. On the smaller switch, right, this is going to be hard for me to see, but normally open is here in the middle, and common is on the side. So all that really matters is I'm using the two, since I'm not using motor braking, all that matters is I'm using these two connectors that are closest to the button that gets pressed down. Right, so the setup of my circuit is complete. And this is going to be hard to convey. First, I'm pushing on, again, very lightly, some stock flywheels just to confirm spinning direction and whatnot. Okay. I have two switches. The smaller switch is going to go to the pusher motor. The larger switch goes to the flywheels. And then the positive from the XT60 is spliced in here, not really greatly, but it's functional and it can hold. I'm sure that there's a better way to do that. And the negative is spliced in up here. And I've covered the XT60 end, both of those, and this splice with heat shrink. I couldn't really get heat shrink on the switch part now. This is an NIMH battery, and so obviously my flywheels work, but my pusher motor does not seem to. So I will have to troubleshoot that. Right, so an error was detected with my wiring. On the pusher switch, I ended up soldering one to normally open and one to normally closed instead of one to COM. So that's bad. Needless to say, I've corrected it off camera. So now I have one switch, the small one, which will activate the pusher, and the larger switch, which will activate flywheels. Alright, so this is basically the conclusion of the Cyclonic mod video. All that's really left, or all that was left, was that I had to super glue the switches in place. You want it so that it will press one switch and then the other in sequence when you move the trigger further in. So that's a click for the first switch, and that's a click for the second switch. You have to glue them to the raised portion where the original contact switches were. There's not a whole lot of room there. You can't really use this part because it's lower than the part that'll press, unless your switch is very wide, I suppose. But it's not bad. You can make it work. And you just connect your battery. You have plenty of room over here to insert your battery pack. And then you just screw everything back together and you're good to go. You can... One of the really nice things about this is you can take all of the internals out completely. Nothing is glued in. Things are only screwed in. So you can take this out, and paint the shell, modify the shell any way you want. And then just put the internals back in. 4 screws here, 4 screws here, and then the external screws, and you're done. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this.